Thank you very much indeed. I have to say that I disagree with both of the two previous speakers, as indeed I must. And in spite of Mead's excellent references to my earlier presentation. I would like to argue that behavior change is completely irrelevant. The first problem is that we're fighting 100,000 years of evolution, and Darwin taught us that evolution is what it's all about. The second is that we all believe in behavior change, but behavior change is like peace on earth. We all want it, but we have no idea how to get it. But I'd like to argue that Joop has completely missed the point. While it is true that the biomedical inventions are important, that's not the issue. The issue is how do we get it to people? So I have to suggest to you that what we really need is hotspotting. Now, when they first asked me to talk about hotspotting, I thought they were talking about some new and interesting way of finding sexual partners, and then I realized that wasn't what they wanted me to talk about. They wanted me to talk about how do we find people who are HIV positive. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about and see whether I can persuade you that this is really the most important thing. The first question is, are resources limited? And in fact, I think they're not limited. If we say it's $500 per person per year to treat a person with HIV, $15 billion for 30 million people, that makes up 0.02% of the world's gross national product. But HIV-positive people make up 0.3% of the world's population, so I think this is money well and justifiably spent, and I don't think resources is really the problem. But when we talk about impact, we have to be very careful. What do we mean by impact? Do we mean saving money, lives, new infections, ending AIDS as soon as possible? Unless we're clear about what it is we want to achieve, we can never really decide what is the best way to achieve it. Now, it's true that HIV is extraordinarily variable. Here's a map of the number of people living with HIV per square kilometre in South Africa. It's quite old data in 2001. And you see that, of course, they are concentrated in Durban, in the bottom right, in Johannesburg, and in Cape Town. So clearly, if we're going to look for people with HIV, we're going to find a lot more people in those big centres. We still, of course, have to ask the question is, how does treating people in those centres affect the spread of infection, and what will it do to other places? But clearly, there's a reason why we may want to focus on the places where we've got 200 people per square kilometre infected with HIV rather than one person per square kilometre infected with HIV. India is even more puzzling. In the whole of North India, the Hindi-speaking states in the north, there's virtually no HIV at all. It's about 0.1%. In the four big states in the south, there's a lot more HIV, none in Kerala, which is a Catholic state, different from the others. And we actually have no idea why it is that there's much more HIV in South India than there is in North India. But if we're going to look for HIV in India, we better start with Mumbai, which is over on the left in that nice dark shaded area. And then the other places in India where there are people living with HIV. So this is, I think, what we mean by hotspotting, going to the places where people are infected. Kenya is equally puzzling. If you look at a map of Kenya, prevalence of HIV by district in Kenya, it's actually really quite low. Throughout Kenya, it's about 3, 4, 5%, excepting in 9 districts bordering on Lake Victoria. And those 9 districts you highlighted on the right where the map's blown up are the districts where the prevalence reaches 25%. Again, nobody actually knows why this is so. I mean, people think it's because they're on Lake Victoria to do with fishing. There's all sorts of reasons. But what we see is that Busia, the one on the extreme left, is actually on Lake Victoria, but the prevalence there is about 3 or 4%. So why is Busia so much less than Siaya or Kisii or Nyanza or the other ones nearby it? So we actually don't know the reason. We need to know the reasons. If we knew the reasons, we could make much more progress. I mean, it is puzzling that it's so high in Siaya, but it hasn't spread to Busia. What is the reason for that? But given that we don't understand any of these things, we don't understand what's driving the epidemic in any of these places, let us at least start by going to the places where the infection is. But that, of course, is easier said than done. I mean, if we just take the prevalence of HIV by country, ignore the column on the right, I meant to blank it out just this moment and forgot, we see that the variance, and this is simply repeating what I said, varies from about 0.2% in North India to 40% in IDUs in Vietnam, with everything in between. West Africa higher, East Africa still higher, South Africa still higher, KwaZulu and Natal still higher. So enormous variation in the prevalence of HIV. And what we need to think about is how do we use that information? Now, if we just think about efficiency, how do we find the biggest number of people? Clearly, we should test where the prevalence is highest. But equity and impact both say that we should test everybody once a year so that whatever the population prevalence is, if they do get infected, they will be able to start ART within about a year, as Joop said is important. So I think that is a given. But so the efficiency argument is not the right argument. It's the equity and impact arguments that we need to focus on. So now I wanted to put the cost things in, and if you just say there's $10 per test, then if we do random testing, we see that in North India it would cost $50,000 to find one person. In Vietnam, it would cost $250 to find one person. Now, if the cost of ART is $500 a year, we may say we don't want to spend more than a couple of $1,000s testing people before we find them. So all the areas in the bottom half of that graph, we could do random testing. But all of the places in the top part of that slide, we need to think more carefully about how we're going to find them. But random testing isn't the only way to do it. The networking people up at Ermax have some very interesting ways of using network structures to find people. We can do partner tracing, we do contact tracing, we can do all sorts of other methods. So we have to be creative and imaginative in how we find people. So we don't want to spend $50,000 to find one woman in North India who's HIV positive. So it's not easy, but what we need to do. And then just to remind you about Vietnam, this is that same data I showed earlier on Vietnam. The big circle is the number of, area of the big blue circle is the number of low-risk women infected with HIV. The little red dot in the middle is the number of those who are infected with HIV, big circle is the population. We see there are as many IDUs, bottom right, as there are low-risk women infected, but there are many more low-risk women. So we have to think very carefully. If we just think where are the biggest numbers, it's actually the low-risk women. If we ask where is it easy to find people, it's the IDU. So we're not saying that hotspotting is going to be easy, but it's what we need to do. So what is loosely called hotspotting has great potential, but how we actually do it in practice will depend critically on what we want to achieve. So we need to set our targets. We need our optimization function, in the words of the networking people. We want to avert new cases. Do you want to save lives? Do you want to end AIDS? Do you want to save money? It's going to depend on local conditions, on the prevalence in that area, on age. Prevalence varies strongly with age, on gender. Women are more likely to be infected than men, especially young women. Key populations, if we have them, like in Vietnam, the structure of sexual networks, and of course, what the cost of providing drugs is, of health services, and all the rest of it. We think about how we're going to find people infected with HIV, and we could do random testing, we could do contact tracing, partner identification, routine testing, and all of these things have to be thought through very carefully. But all of this is really just a variation on the overall theme, which is that hotspotting is what really matters. So if we're going to do hotspotting, I think it's important, but we have to remember that there really are no magic bullets and no substitute for clear thinking. So that's my argument. Thank you.